The cold metal of the restraints bit into his wrists, the weight of them pulling his arms taut behind his back. He could still feel the bruises forming along his ribs, each breath a reminder of the blows that had rained down on him hours, maybe days, ago. Time had lost meaning since the Zalzareth had taken him. The only constants were the ache in his bones and the sneering faces of his captors. The cell was small, barely enough for him to stretch out if he lay down. The walls, sleek and metallic, pulsed with a faint green glow, emanating from some unknown source embedded deep within the alien structure. The air smelled sterile, tinged with something acrid like burnt ozone. The Zalzareth had spared no effort in making their prisoners feel like nothing more than animals caged for amusement. One of them stood on the other side of the energy barrier, its elongated skull reflecting the sickly light. Its 4 eyes, set deep within a ridged face, gleamed with cruel amusement as it studied him. Its mandibles clicked together in an unmistakable expression of condescension. A resilient one, it mused in its guttural, clicking tongue, though the translation device grafted to his ear conveyed the meaning clearly. It is curious. You are small, fragile. And yet you survived where others fell. He didn't answer. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him react. The alien tilted its head, stepping closer to the barrier. You do not fear us. A pause, then a soft, almost mocking chitter. You should. Another Zalzareth joined the first, this one taller, its exoskeletal armor a deeper shade of obsidian. It regarded him with something between contempt and boredom before shifting its attention to the marks on his skin. Scars, the second alien said dismissively. Primitive markings. Perhaps ritualistic. He remained silent, but inwardly, he noted how easily they dismissed what they did not understand. The tally marks on his arms were no ritual. They were records. Each line carved into his skin told the story of an enemy fallen, a battle won, a moment where death had reached for him but found another instead. The first alien crouched slightly, lowering itself to his level. You are alone, it said, voice almost gentle in its mockery. Your fleet is gone. Your people scattered or dead. There is no escape from this place. No one is coming for you. He finally spoke, his voice hoarse from disuse. I know. That seemed to amuse them. The taller one emitted a low clicking sound, something close to laughter. Good. Acceptance makes this easier. The barrier deactivated for just a moment, long enough for a mechanical arm to extend into the cell and drop a metallic tray of food onto the floor. The gruel-like substance within sloshed thickly, its color an unappetizing shade of gray. It smelled vaguely of protein paste and something synthetic. Eat, the first alien said, rising to its full height. You will need your strength. We entertain ourselves tomorrow. He did not respond, did not move to touch the food, even as his stomach coiled in hunger. He could survive hunger. He had endured worse. They watched him for a moment longer before departing, their elongated limbs carrying them down the corridor in fluid strides. The force field shimmered back into place behind them, casting shifting light across the cell's walls. He allowed himself a slow, measured breath. He had learned long ago that the worst thing a captive could do was show weakness. Fear was a language creatures like the Zalzareth spoke fluently. But respect, that was something different. His mind drifted back to the battle. The ambush had been swift, brutal. The Zalzareth had come in force, their sleek black ships blotting out the void, their weapons carving through human defenses like hot steel through flesh. The fighting had been desperate, a last stand in the cold embrace of space. His squad had fought to the last man. He had watched them fall one by one until only he remained. They had taken him alive. What? That remained unclear. Perhaps they thought him a curiosity. Perhaps they simply enjoyed the spectacle of a lone survivor, a defeated warrior with nowhere left to run. A faint hum vibrated through the floor, signaling the ship's movement. Outside his cell, distant echoes of alien speech drifted through the corridors. Somewhere, other prisoners screamed. Somewhere someone begged. He did neither. Instead he shifted his wrists, testing the restraints. Tight but not unbreakable. The Zalzareth were arrogant, sure of their superiority. That arrogance made them careless. He had learned something in the brief time he had been their captive. Something more valuable than any weapon. He had learned that they underestimated him. They saw a lone human, wounded and caged, a creature to be studied and discarded. They did not yet see what lurked beneath the surface. He shifted slightly, just enough for the dim light to cast across his forearm. The tally marks gleamed faintly, raised ridges of old and new scars alike. They thought they were looking at meaningless carvings. They had no idea they were looking at a record of their own dead. And when they finally understood, it would be too late. The scent of blood hung thick in the air, mixing with the sterile tang of metal and ozone. The arena was a crude thing, circular, surrounded by towering walls of dark alloy that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent glow. From above, alien voices chittered and clicked in anticipation, their excitement echoing through the vast chamber. He stood in the center, wrists unshackled but still bearing the raw impressions of the restraints. His muscles ached, his ribs still bruised from the last time the Zalzareth had decided to amuse themselves at his expense. This, however, was different. The crowd wanted blood. Across from him, a hulking form loomed. The creature stood nearly twice his height, its exoskeletal frame reinforced with overlapping plates of dark carapace. It exuded raw strength, its elongated limbs ending in thick, clawed fingers that twitched with anticipation. Its deep-set eyes gleamed with predatory focus, and its mandibles flexed in what he had come to recognize as a sneer. A champion. A favored warrior among the Zalzareth. This was not a test. This was an execution. A low hum vibrated through the arena as the energy barriers sealed them in. The crowd above fell silent, waiting for the moment the spectacle would begin. The alien took a step forward, its movements deliberate, measured. It did not see him as a threat. It saw him as something weak, something already dead. He let it believe that. The first strike came fast. The warrior lunged, claws flashing toward his throat. He moved on instinct, dropping low, feeling the rush of air as death swiped just inches above his head. He pivoted, shifting his weight as he sprang to the side, evading a follow-up strike that shattered the ground where he had stood moments before. Dust and debris kicked up around him. The Zalzareth warrior let out a sharp, guttural noise, surprise, annoyance. It came at him again, this time slower, more methodical. He could see the calculation behind its movements now, the way it adjusted its stance, adapting to his evasions. It was not just strong, it was experienced. So was he. The next attack came in a sweeping arc. He didn't dodge this time. He stepped into it, closing the distance in a heartbeat, moving faster than the alien expected. Before it could react, he struck. A precise blow to the side of its throat, where the chitinous plates were thinnest. Its body jerked in reflex, mandibles clicking in pain. But it was not enough. A massive hand lashed out, catching him across the chest. The force sent him sprawling, his back slamming against the hard ground. Pain exploded through him, but he forced himself to move before the killing blow could come. He rolled, barely avoiding the downward strike that would have caved in his skull. The impact left a crater where he had been, dust rising in thick clouds. The crowd roared. He rose to his feet, steady despite the ache in his ribs. He could feel their eyes on him now, more than just idle curiosity. They had expected him to die. Instead he was still standing. The Zalzareth warriors circled him now, slower, studying him. His breathing had changed, more measured, more cautious. It understood now that he was not prey. But understanding would not be enough to save it. He moved first this time, a feint to the left before darting right. The alien anticipated the motion, reacting instantly, but he was ready for that. He shifted mid-step, sliding low beneath its counterattack and striking hard at the back of its knee joint. The chitin cracked beneath his knuckles. The warrior staggered. He did not give it a chance to recover. He drove his elbow into its side, following up with a brutal strike to the throat. The alien reeled back, a choking sound escaping its mandibles. Then he saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in its eyes. Fear. It was small, buried beneath layers of instinct and training, but it was there. And the crowd saw it too. The murmurs began as whispers, rippling through the onlookers like a slow-moving current. They had misjudged him. The alien warrior let out a guttural snarl and charged, its injured leg faltering slightly. It swung wildly, its composure fractured. He sidestepped with practiced ease, gripping its outstretched arm and using its own momentum against it. He twisted, planting his foot against its knee as he wrenched the limb back. A sickening crack echoed through the arena. The warrior collapsed. Silence. He stood over his fallen opponent, chest rising and falling in steady breaths. The alien twitched, trying to rise, but the damage had been done. It could no longer fight. He stepped back, hands loose at his sides. He did not need to finish it. The battle was already over. A single voice broke the quiet. Look. It was not spoken in his language, but his ears caught the weight of it nonetheless. A figure had leaned forward in the observation deck above, a high-ranking Zalzareth, clad in armor darker than the void. Its 4 eyes were locked onto him, but not his face. His arms. A shift rippled through the crowd, eyes drawn to the marks on his skin. The realization came in waves, slow at first, then crashing with force. Not scars. Not primitive ritualistic carvings. A tally. A record. Recognition swept through the gathered aliens, a visible change in the way they regarded him. The warrior lying broken at his feet was no longer the most important thing in the arena. He was. They had called him weak. Had treated him like something lesser. Had believed him nothing more than a human prisoner, a captured soldier soon to be discarded. But now, as they counted the marks on his skin, marks that matched the reports of their fallen, they saw something else entirely. The arena, once filled with the sounds of jeers and amusement, had fallen into uneasy silence. He met the gaze of the armored figure above, holding it without fear. The moment stretched, heavy with something unspoken. Then, slowly, the commander inclined its head. Not in dismissal. In acknowledgement. For the first time since his capture, the Zalzareth saw him for what he was. Not prey. Not a beast. A warrior. And warriors were not caged. The weight of their stares followed him long after the arena's dust had settled. He could feel it in the way the guards hesitated when they passed his cell, in the way their hands twitched near their weapons, as if expecting him to lash out at any moment. The shift had been subtle at first, little more than a crack in the foundation of their arrogance. Now it was a fracture spreading through the ranks of the Zalzareth, widening with every whisper of his name. They had spent days, perhaps weeks, treating him like an animal. Now they did not know what to do with him. The answer came in the form of the armored figure who had watched him in the arena, the one who had been first to recognize the tally on his skin. It stood before his cell now, silent, studying him with an intensity that felt almost surgical. The guards at its side remained still, waiting for orders. When it finally spoke, its voice was smoother than the others he had encountered, measured and deliberate. "You are not what we believed." He didn't answer. There was no need. "You fought well," the Zalzareth continued. "But that was only one battle. Strength is not measured in a single victory." Pause. "A challenge. They say you have killed many of our kind. Prove it." The energy barrier deactivated. The guards tensed, hands tightening on their weapons, but the commander merely gestured for him to step forward. He did, slow and steady, keeping his expression unreadable even as his pulse quickened. They did not move to restrain him. They did not drag him through the corridors like a captured beast. This time, they led him with wary caution, as if walking beside something they did not fully understand. He was taken to a different part of the vessel, far from the sterile cages and interrogation chambers. The walls here pulsed with a deeper glow, the air thick with the scent of ozone and something sharper, something metallic. When the doors slid open he understood why. The chamber was vast, the floor polished obsidian, reflecting the light of bioluminescent fixtures that spiraled up the walls like veins of molten metal. But it was what stood at the center that drew his focus. A ring. Smaller than the arena but more refined. No crude pits or jagged walls, no frenzied spectators jeering from the shadows. This was not a place for amusement. This was a place for warriors. The commander stepped forward, its exoskeletal armor gleaming under the soft glow of the overhead lights. "You will fight," it said. "Not for survival. Not for spectacle. You will fight to see if you are worthy." Worthy. Of what, it did not say. A door slid open across the chamber. Another Zalzareth entered, this one smaller than the brute he had faced in the arena but faster, the way it moved precise and fluid. No wasted motion, no reckless lunges. A trained killer. The commander raised a hand and the fight began. The alien struck first, a blur of movement as it darted forward, claws slicing through the air. He shifted, narrowly avoiding the strike, but before he could counter, it twisted, using its momentum to bring a second attack from a different angle. This time he blocked, absorbing the impact with his forearm, pain lancing up the bone. Faster. Smarter. This was no mindless brute. He adapted. The fight became a dance of precision, attacks and counters exchanged in rapid succession. His opponent moved with a grace that spoke of years, perhaps decades, of training. But skill alone was not enough. The moment came in a flicker, the briefest gap in its defenses. He seized it. A feint, a step inward, and then he was inside its guard. His fist struck the side of its skull, followed by a brutal knee to the torso. The alien staggered. He did not relent. A second strike sent it crashing to the ground. Silence. He stepped back, breathing steady, waiting. The Zalzareth rose, slower this time, but it did not attack again. Instead, it tilted its head in a motion that was not quite submission, not quite defeat. Acknowledgement. The commander observed in silence before finally speaking. "You are not like the others we have taken." A flick of its hand and another warrior stepped forward. The fights continued. Days blurred into one another, filled with battle after battle, each opponent more skilled than the last. They tested his limits, forced him to adapt, to push past exhaustion, past pain. But he endured. And with every fight the way they looked at him changed. At first they had watched him as an anomaly, an oddity that defied their expectations. Then they studied him as a subject, analyzing his movements, his tactics. Now they watched him as one of their own. The murmurs began to spread. He heard them in the halls, caught glimpses of wary respect in the eyes of the guards who escorted him. They did not speak to him like a prisoner anymore. They did not sneer when he passed. He was still human, still an outsider. But he was no longer beneath them. The commander called for him again. This time there was no cell to return to. He stood before the armored figure, the weight of unseen choices pressing against the air between them. "You have earned something rare among my kind," the commander said. "A choice." The words hung there, heavy with meaning. "You may continue fighting," the alien continued, "as one of us. There is honor in our ranks for those who prove themselves, no matter their origins. Pause. Test. Or you may reject it. But know this, if you do you will not return to your cell. You will not be caged. That time is over." He met the commander's gaze, searching for deception but finding none. The offer was real. He had not just survived. He had risen. But to what end? He did not answer immediately. Because for the first time since his capture, his path was not determined for him. It was his to decide. The warship drifted in the abyss of space, its dark hull absorbing the distant glow of a dying star. Inside, the air was thick with tension, an unspoken charge crackling between the warriors assembled in the command chamber. They stood in silence, exoskeletal armor gleaming under the cold artificial light, waiting for him to speak. He had not yet grown used to the weight of their expectation. Days had passed since the choice had been given to him. Days spent among them, training, listening, learning. He was no longer a prisoner, no longer a caged spectacle for their amusement. He had earned a place among them, but the place he sought was not within their ranks. It was something greater. The commander stood opposite him, silent, unreadable. The one who had offered him a future. The one who had seen the truth behind his scars before any of the others had understood. The offer had been genuine, but the path was not his to walk. "I am not one of you." His voice was steady, carrying across the chamber with quiet finality. "I never will be." A ripple moved through the assembled warriors. Some narrowed their eyes, others shifted uneasily, uncertain of what would come next. The commander, however, only inclined its head slightly. "I suspected as much," it said. Pause. A careful calculation. "You seek something else." He nodded. "I seek an end to this. A war that had taken his people. A war that had cast him adrift in the black void, left him fighting for survival in the belly of an enemy ship. The Zalzareth had thought him defeated, had paraded him like a broken thing. And yet he had risen. Not to become one of them, but to bring them to their knees. The commander studied him for a long moment. "You are alone." "I was alone." He took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the assembled warriors. "But I am not anymore." Some of them looked away. Others held his stare. Not all of them would follow. He did not need all of them. Only enough. The commander exhaled slowly, mandibles clicking in thought. Then, with a motion deliberate and slow, it removed the insignia clasped to its armor and held it out. A symbol of command. Authority. He did not take it. "Not like this," he said. "Not with a gesture. If you would stand with me, then do it not as a gift, but as a choice." The Zalzareth did not bow. Did not kneel. But what the commander did next carried more weight than any display of submission. It turned, stepping away from the center of the chamber, and strode to the control panel embedded in the far wall. The ship's systems flickered to life beneath its touch. Holograms expanded, revealing the vast expanse of space before them. And in the distance, hanging in the void like a specter from his past, was the target. A Zalzareth war fleet. Hundreds of ships, each bristling with weapons, each carrying thousands of warriors ready to strike. A force that had cut a swath across the stars, leaving ruin in its wake. The same fleet that had slaughtered his people. He had spent so long in the dark, surviving, waiting, fighting. Now the reckoning had come. The commander turned back to him. "We move at your word." He let the moment stretch, feeling the weight of it settle upon his shoulders. The Zalzareth had called him a beast. had caged him, humiliated him, treated him as nothing more than prey. But in doing so they had made him into something else. Not a prisoner. Not a soldier. A warlord. He stepped forward, eyes locked on the fleet that had once been untouchable, and gave the only order that mattered. Burn them.